But right now, I'm very happy to turn the podium over to a scholar of the Constitution, a practitioner of the law, and a friend, Senator Mike Lee of Utah.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Matt. Thanks to all of you for being here for this event that I've been very excited about for some time. It's altogether fitting that we should have this event here, and I'm honored and humbled that we're holding it just underneath this beautiful painting, this wonderful depiction of the miracle at Philadelphia. The only downside is that this painting is a little bit intimidating for me, because when I'm standing in front of it, I feel like they're looking down at me as if to say, "You're doing it wrong." As if to say, we specifically said in Article 1, Section 1, Clause 1, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress. You're doing it wrong because other people are making the laws. But that's, after all, why we're here today. Today's event is the official launch of the Article 1 project. It's also a fitting reflection of what our project is all about. In the speeches and the panels that will follow, you'll hear from 9 conservative policymakers about how they intend to help fix what's wrong with Washington and help us change the way we have departed from the Constitution to restore the constitutional structures and protections. And you're going to see an approach to policymaking in stark contrast to the way that bills are so often written today, that is an open, collaborative process and an ideas-driven process. This is the Article 1 project in a nutshell. It's a new network of House and Senate conservatives working together on a new agenda of government reform, and one that focuses on congressional rehabilitation. The premise of the Article 1 project is very simple. The federal government's broken, and congressional weakness is to blame. Congressional acquiescence is at the very heart of the problems that we face in Washington. The authors of the Constitution made Congress the most powerful of the federal government's 3 co-equal branches. Congress was designed both as the most powerful and as the most accountable to the people. And it was no coincidence that it occurred in this fashion. Consent of the governed in any republic depends on transparent policymaking within representative institutions. Congress's embrace of this mandate is part of what has made America both successful and also exceptional. But if there's one thing politicians of every political party and of every ideology tend to agree on, it's that hard work and accountability are inconvenient. They're rarely easy. In fact, they never are. They weren't designed to be. They perform a different but even more important function. And so over the course of the 20th century and accelerating into the 21st century, Congress has handed many of its constitutional responsibilities over to the executive branch. Increasingly harmful federal laws are increasingly written by people who never stand for election, via processes contrary to those provided for in the Constitution, and indeed with the explicit purpose of excluding the American people from their government and shielding policymakers from popular accountability. This part of it is not a bug. It is, in fact, a feature, and it's a feature that has to be reversed. Executive overreach is an enormous problem, but it's a problem largely, in fact, almost entirely, of Congress's own making. Under Houses, Senates, Presidents, and Supreme Courts of every conceivable partisan combination, Congress has recast itself as the backseat driver in American politics. Today, the vast majority of federal laws, upwards of 95%, are passed not by the House and Senate and signed by the President, but instead they're imposed unilaterally by unelected executive branch bureaucrats. At the same time, Congress's budget process has almost entirely broken down. Most federal spending has been put on autopilot, effectively, authorized without a vote. Meanwhile, fiscal oversight, deliberation, and reform are a bipartisan charade of sorts. This upending of our constitutional order has led not only to bad policy, but also to deep and legitimate public distrust in our governing institutions. This dysfunction is a large and a growing problem for the American Republic. And for conservatives, it represents something like a crisis for at least two reasons. First, conservatives believe in constitutionalism and the rule of law as such as bulwarks for protecting freedom and justice in our society. And second, this massive wholesale transfer of lawmaking power from Congress to the executive branch unmistakably tilts the policymaking field, rigging the lawmaking process to benefit the wealthy and the well-connected at the expense of everyone else, and perhaps most noticeably at the expense of America's poor middle class. When elected representatives in Congress tie their own hands and empower unelected bureaucrats to make our laws, and in fact, to make the overwhelming majority of our laws, measured by volume, measured by most measures that are available here, it unavoidably thwarts the kinds of policies that conservatives tend to advocate. That is, policies that limit the size and scope of government, and by so doing, protect the equal rights and opportunities available to all Americans. So it's no wonder Congress's job approval ratings are at historic lows. You know, most polls put our approval ratings at somewhere around 10%, which makes us slightly less popular than Fidel and Raul Castro in America. And it makes us only slightly more popular than the influenza virus, which is rapidly gaining on us. In many ways, we're not even doing our job, and the nation is paying the price. But there is some good news. What a weak Congress has broken, a strong Congress can fix. And a strong Congress will fix. The constitutional powers necessary to put a representative accountable, federal government back to work for the American people, are still right there in the Constitution. They're still right there in Article 1 of our governing document, ready to be reasserted. All that remains is for us to assert them properly. That is exactly why we're launching the Article 1 project here today. The purpose of the project is to develop, advance, and ultimately enact an agenda of meaningful structural reforms to strengthen Congress by reclaiming its constitutional legislative powers that today are being improperly delegated to and ultimately exercised by the executive branch. Specifically, A1P will focus on restoring congressional power in four key areas that are at the core of Washington, D.C.'s broken status quo. First, reclaiming Congress's power of the purse. Second, reforming legislative cliffs. Third, reasserting congressional authority over regulations and over regulators. And finally, curbing executive discretion. My colleagues will talk in more detail about these four pillars of the Article 1 project that we're forming today, and they'll explain what A1P seeks is not so much to change Congress as to revive it. You see, Congress as it exists, Congress as it was created, Congress as it was provided for in Article 1 of the Constitution, has the power to do all of these things. We're just reviving it. We're just restoring that which has been diminished over time, that which has been clouded by other things. To make it once again live up to its founding purpose, to be the driving force in federal policymaking, not for the sake of the ambitions of any individual politician or even the collective ambitions of all federal politicians, but rather to protect and empower the American people they represent. Our goal here is simply to make Congress once again responsible, both in the sense of performing our constitutional duties, and also performing those duties transparently so that our fellow Americans can hold us accountable for the choices we make on their behalf. All that stands between today's broken status quo and a government of, by, and for the people is the will of Congress to finally step up and do its job. For decades, Congress has done nearly everything in its power to do exactly the opposite. It's done everything it possibly can, everything it can think of to avoid doing its job. to surrender its constitutional powers to the executive branch, to have somebody else make the law. And the country and the American people have suffered tremendously as a result. But with these 9 lawmakers, their collective and innovative ideas for reform and their endless supply of political courage and energy, we have the power to change that. It is truly an honor to be part of this effort, and I look forward to standing side by side with this group of lawmakers in many future battles on Capitol Hill.